I want to talk about thesis statements. Most of the essays that you will write in college and most essays in general are thesis essays. So let's talk about what a thesis is. A lot of people will say that a thesis is what the essay is about or the subject of the essay, but that's not exactly right. What a thesis is what you're trying to prove or convince your reader of in your argumentative essay. So the thesis is what you're trying to argue, not just what it's about, right? But what specifically you're trying to say about this thing. So again, many formal essays that you'll write in college will be required to have a thesis. So let's talk about what makes a good thesis. And I think there are 5 things that make a good thesis. It should be clear, arguable, central, focused, and supportable. And I'm going to go through each one of these. So clear, it should be clear early on in the paper, usually in the first paragraph or two, exactly what your thesis is, exactly what argument you're making in this essay. You should be able to point to a sentence or two and say, this is the thesis, right? This is what I'm arguing. Make sure it makes sense, make sure it's specific and not vague. This may seem obvious, but I get papers all the time where I'm reading it and I'm not sure a few paragraphs in what the thesis is. So your reader should know early on in the essay very clearly what the thesis is. A thesis should be arguable or debatable, right? So think about engaging in a debate, right? There should be other sides of the issue. So you're making your specific argument, but what would someone who disagrees with you say, right? There should be other sides to the argument. If there aren't other sides to the argument, if it's not possible to write an essay arguing against what you're saying, then it's really not a strong thesis, right? You don't want your thesis to be something obvious. You want it to be engaging in a debate. You arguing for one side in a debate. So always ask yourself, could I argue against this? It should be central. Everything in your essay should in some way go towards supporting your thesis, whether it's direct support, whether it's taking other point of views into account, whether it's background information. Everything, the thesis is central to everything. Everything goes back to that thesis. Everything revolves around that thesis. So one thing you want to think about is you want your thesis to be broad enough that you can write an entire essay about it. On the other hand, you want it to be focused. You don't want it to be too broad, focused enough that you can treat it adequately in your essay. Now, it depends, different lengths of essays may require different types of thesis statements. Generally speaking, it's better to be more focused than broad, I would say. So, if you have a 5-page essay to write, pollution is a big problem in the world, is a very broad thesis statement, right? It's going to be hard to adequately treat that in 5 pages. But maybe there's too much litter in our local creek here in town, and we should do a big cleanup. Like that's a nice, very focused, very specific thesis. So try to be focused, try to be specific. And then, of course, it should be supportable using objective evidence, right? So objective evidence includes facts, concrete examples, statistics, expert opinions, right? Even stories, but though you don't want to build an argument just on anecdotes, but just objective stuff that people can objectively see as being, true and accurate. That's what you want to use to support your thesis, as opposed to subjective evidence, which typically involves emotional responses or sensory responses to things. So think about if I wanted to write an essay that we should ban smoking on campus. Objectively, there are a lot of things I could cite, right? The dangers of secondhand smoke, right? That we know smoking is related to cancer. But what I would not want to do is say, cigarettes smell really bad. I don't like them. They bother me. They're annoying, something like that. That's just subjective. That's just your sensory response to something. So stay objective in your supports of your thesis. So again, to review really quickly, clear, arguable, central, focused, and supportable.